that sparked his interest, and did an enormous amount of investigation after seeing that video. But I think it's interesting when it's a topic that probably not everyone in the room knows about. I certainly didn't know about it until this voyage began. Do I have any other announcements to make? I'm collecting my own thoughts after lunch. I think that I don't have any other announcements to make, but let me get this set up. And give me just a second to settle in one of the desks.
Hello, my name's Oliver Cusick. I want to thank everyone for coming to my Senior X presentation. Before we begin, shoutouts. I want to thank my mentor, Ms. Anderson, for helping me. I want to thank my community evaluator for taking the time out of their day to watch my presentation, my parents for supporting me at home, and my friends here for supporting me while at school. My Senior X topic is deep sea mining in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. Now, let me first ask you a question. What is a life-changing amount of money? I want you to imagine a number in your head, like an amount of money that would specifically and could change your life significantly in a large way. Now, for some people, it would be around the hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands. Since we live in California, most of you are probably thinking millions. Now, around $1 million, $10 million, that's enough money to change your life in a drastic way. However, less people think about 100 million. Now, $100 million, you'll be lucky if you make this much money in your whole lifetime. Most people don't. Even fewer people think about 100 or $1 billion. Now, $1 billion, we're getting into the realm of just big companies like most people don't even, like this amount of money on your regular day just doesn't even come into your head. And fewer does $1 trillion. This is the amount of money that we get into country spending, big tech, big medicine, numbers like these. So what if I were to tell you that around $1 trillion worth is located somewhere in the world? And when I mean around $1 trillion worth, I mean $18 trillion worth. $18 trillion is all located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in an area called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. And this brings me to my essential question, which is, should the Clarion-Clipperton Zone be mined? Before we go over that, a quick overview. First, we have the introduction, which I just went over, context, background, what is the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, etc. The answer to my essential question, my argument to why, counter-argument and a rebuttal against it, and then lastly, my conclusion and just key takeaways. So, as we start, a bit of history. The Clarion-Clipperton Zone, or CCZ, was discovered in 1870 by the HMS British Challenger. Now, why was doing a journey around the world, it happened to stumble upon what would soon be known as the CCZ. And while over there, they accidentally dredged up this. A potato-sized shaped metal, or as people call it now, a nodule, with various metals in it, such as cobalt, magnesium, nickel, lithium, and iron. Now, for the most part, this would just be left alone, because at the time there just simply wasn't the technologies to acquire it. And the reason for that is the depth. Now, the CCZ is located around 4 miles below the ocean. That's around 20,000 feet or so, meaning that almost entirely all of it is is located in the abyss or the abyssal zone, with some of it even going down into the trenches or hadal zone. And these environments are extremely dark, little to no light, sound, or anything, with extreme pressure. However, as the 1960s and 70s would progress, and as technology would evolve, eventually we would get the means to acquiring these minerals. And this is here, one of the very first successful attempts of acquiring them. Here you can see the nodules themselves in the corner. And as the technology would progress, it would become possible to attain them. People would want them, such as the lithium in the nodules for batteries, the magnesium for fertilizer, or the iron and steel to make stainless steel. However, as it became more and more possible to attain these metals, another question arose, which was location. Now, as seen here, the CCZ is located in the middle of the ocean, far away from any single country. So now the question becomes, whose is it to own? Now, normally, you would determine this with the Economic Exclusive Zone, or EEZ. Essentially, every single country 200 miles off their shores is considered the EEZ, and anything that falls within this area would be that country's and under their jurisdiction. Typically, this is used for economic practices such as oil refineries or fisheries, things along those lines. And of course, every single country has them. However, the problem still remains. The CCZ is located outside of all of these. In fact, it's located in a part of the ocean known, and this is not a great term, but it is the term that is used, the area. Now, the area makes up around 72% of all of the ocean, and it is considered non-governed waters. And economic exclusive zones make up about only 28% of all that water. Something that a lot of people might get confused about and might correlate the area to is international waters. International waters, if you've heard in movies or such, is like waters with no law. While that is true, and they do have many similarities, typically international waters refers to things above the water, in the water. Sea ships, vessels, things along that nature. While the area typically refers to things at the bottom of the sea, typically resources, metals, oils, things of that nature. So now, all of these problems arise. Who's going to regulate it? Who's going to overlook it? How will this mining affect the environment? All these questions over whose the CCZ belongs to, someone was going to need to make an authority body to overlook the area and as well the CCZ. And as such, the creation of the International Seabed Authority, or ISA, was created by the UN. Now, the International Seabed Authority, or ISA, has three main goals, those of which are to benefit all of mankind, which essentially means they will be a fair body that will help negotiate between countries and be a neutral party to all countries. Consider developing nations and countries. Essentially, this means that they would make sure that all developing countries would be considered in the procurement of materials. This is so that the practice of colonialism, and essentially the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, of larger and smaller countries does not repeat itself again. And lastly, to protect the marine environment. This is to do so because so that any procurement of any materials will be done so with consideration of the environment. So this brings me back to my essential question. Should the Clarion-Clipperton Zone be mined? My response? No, it should not be mined. And my first reason is that the ISA is not the right body to overlook the area, including the CCZ. One reason, understaffed. The ISA is, to say ridiculously understaffed would be an understatement. Put this into perspective. This is the amount of employees in NOAA. NOAA is the agency for the US that essentially looks over the shorelines and economic exclusive zone of America. Okay. And looks at weather patterns and whatnot. They have 12,000 employees, and that's just America's economic exclusive zone. So the ISA, which looks over all of the area, you would think would have much more people, like 2-3 times at least maybe, but no, 80 people to look over the whole area. Again, that is 72% of all of the water. And NOAA, which only looks over the US's economic exclusive zone, is only a fraction of that 28%. And it still has way more employees than the ISA. Just to visualize this better, all of this light blue would be the land that the ISA has to look after. That is 581 million miles square that they are looking after, and that has only 80 people to look after. And secondly, another reason is the problem with the ISA as an organization itself. By that I mean its corruption. Now, the corruption of the ISA is located, its headquarters, in Kingston, Jamaica. Now, Kingston, Jamaica has an unfortunate past of people of authority abusing this and using it, generally funding for their own, whether it's using what should be funding for whatever purpose, using it for luxury vacations or sports cars. In general, not a great history. And here, in a graph made by Statista, which graphs info from various things around the world, this graph is the corruption index. Now, this generally gives the percentage of how likely it is for a country's actions to be affected by corruption. And Kingston, Jamaica, which is the headquarters of the ISA, has a 44%. 44. That means that there's a 44% chance that any law that is passed in Kingston, Jamaica, and by proxy, the ISA, is affected by corruption. And to give a more specific example of this is Gerald Barron. He is the CEO of the Metals Company, or TMC. It was previously named Deep Green, however, once they went public in 2011, it switched. And this is Michael Lodge. Michael Lodge is the CEO of the ISA, and essentially the head of it. Now, one thing I want to point out is how both of these are in very similar fonts. And that isn't just a coincidence. The reason for this is because this, right here, is pictures taken from a promotional video made by the Metals Company. A promotional video for deep sea mining, and that includes the CEO of the ISA. Again, the CEO of the ISA is promoting a private mining company when they're supposed to be a non-biased party. Does that sound like a non-biased party directly promoting a private company that isn't even really associated with any country? And then we get to environmental impacts. Now, as stated before, the ISA, while it did say that their goal was to protect the environment, as previously shown, the corruption most likely would also affect this. And to prove of this loss of minimizing the environment, this can be seen in the process and impacts of deep sea mining itself. So here's a little graph that kind of shows you the general process of deep sea mining. Typically, a ship will drop down this, a collector. It's essentially like a giant vacuum which sucks up the nodules, right here, which are typically laying on the top of the seafloor. And these nodules would then be vacuumed up into like a giant conveyor belt system of sorts, collected, and then brought up to a ship to be then transported. Now, the problem with this is, first off, these machines are massive, they're tens of tons, and as a result, anything that they come in contact with, they will essentially crush all sea life on the seafloor located in the CCZ. On top of that, while they trudge and drive along, they kick up a bunch of dust, or sediment plume. Now the problem with this sediment plume is that, as mentioned, the CCZ is located at the very bottom of the sea. There's not a lot of creatures there, and most of them are microorganisms. And these creatures rely on filter feeding, so they need to have exposure to water. However, this sediment plume kicks up all this dust and essentially takes over a layer over all of these creatures. As such, they can't filter feed, and as such, it essentially suffocates all the creatures around them in the CCZ. And this isn't just limited to the CCZ though, because as they're collected, since this is a vacuuming system, it's bound to collect some dirt. And as such, they don't want to carry dirt. They're just here for the metals. So right before it goes to the ship, it is discharged and dispersed. And while this might make it seem like the height difference isn't that big, I want to remind you that this is like tens of thousands of feet of difference. So sand from the very bottom of the sea is being shot up where the boats remain, which is around the sunlight zone, at the very top and dispersed between all of these ecosystems. That means that this effect, this sediment plume that is being shot out, is not only suffocating microorganisms that filter feed in the CCZ, but in ecosystems all around. And because it's dispersed from so high, currents can carry this and bring it even further, meaning that this not only disrupts and damages the CCZ's ecosystem, but all ecosystems around it. Focusing more on the collectors themselves, this is Richard Trotter. Now, he is a senior at the Oceans Foundation, an environmental organization, where he has worked there for more than 10 years. Now, in a quote talking about the collectors themselves, he describes them as remote cars. In an example, this quote, think of remote control car. Once it's out of sight, you don't exactly know what it's doing. Now scale that to an abyssal depth, no light, crushing pressure, and extremely fragile life. He is referring to the fact that the collectors, being tens of miles down, cannot be controlled by humans. They're remote controlled. However, for these things, since they only use cameras and lights, can only have very minimal actual perception of what's going on below in the CCZ. To visualize that again, this is typically what you'll see. In the CCZ, pitch black, little sound, nothing. Because it is at such a great depth. And this is what these giant machines have to navigate around. And this is some of the life in the CCZ. On the seafloor, and very, very fragile. As you can see looking at the background, beside what the light is directly being lit on, everything else pitch black, you can't see. And then this is the machine which will be doing it. As previously stated, it's massive, tens of tons, and many lengths larger than a human. And this is going to be the device that will be going through a super fragile ecosystem, and most likely destroying it. And why should you care about these creatures? Well, the reason not only just because it's the environment, but it's the creatures themselves have value, specifically for medicine. An example of this is of this medical use would be a microorganism that was found in thermal vents in the CCZ. Now, this microorganism was actually used to create the cure to COVID-19. And another example of this is a type of horseshoe crab. Now, in the past, horseshoe crabs, their blood has been used to create a cure to certain types of bone cancer. So animals in the CCZ, which we mostly know nothing about, and it's estimated that around 95% of them are undiscovered, good, and unnamed, are potentially being destroyed by these giant collectors and impacting many ecosystems, and especially an ecosystem that could be extremely valuable to not just the environment, but to us, people. Of course, others will argue otherwise. Now, one of the biggest points that people bring about why we need to mine the CCZ, regardless, is global warming. It's no secret that global warming has been increasing, that ice caps have been melting. And to fully decarbonize and to switch to alternative energies, we need metals, lots of metals. It doesn't matter if it's wind turbines, electric vehicle batteries, geothermal plants, hydro plants, solar panels, we're gonna need metals. In fact, it's estimated that if we are to fully decarbonize by 2050, we're gonna need 6 times the metals. However, well, it might be true that we do need metals. I'd like to show you this graph made by the International Energy Agency. Now, here you can see like what needs metals, different types of alternative energies, the amount they need. However, only lithium, nickel, and cobalt are located really in the CCZ and are relevant. And one thing I want to point out is that most of them need a low amount of these metals. Yes. Most of them. And that is with the exception of electric car batteries. And to bring you back to this, they take up almost half of the metals that we need to decarbonize. Now, these electric batteries are a big concern. Cars themselves make up around 33% of all greenhouse gas emissions that were done in the US. However, to counter this claim, I bring up sodium-ion batteries. Now, sodium-ion batteries are a new alternative that is relatively new, but has just entered the market. And what's great about these is it's not only the ability to save the environment, and as seen here, going back to the previous slide, the batteries that need lithium specifically to create these batteries would cost around $155 per kilowatt. However, sodium-ion batteries would only cost $10 per kilowatt, meaning that not only from an environmental standpoint, but from a price standpoint, sodium-ion batteries are dramatically better. And the reason for this? This is a sodium-ion battery and a lithium-ion battery. The main difference can be seen here with the lithium cobalt and the copper foil. Lithium batteries, copper foil, and of course lithium. However, this results in it being more expensive and more damaging to the environment. Sodium-ion batteries do not need such a thing. and as a result are just plainly a better, safer, and more effective from a price standpoint option. And to further debunk this whole counter argument that global warming itself, is needed, and that's why we should mine the CCZ, is irrelevant. That's because of what the sea itself does. Now, the sea itself, according to NOAA, dissolves around 98% of all of the carbon dioxide that is released. Greenhouse gases, it is brought back into the ocean, with only 2% being other methods. To further add on that, also the heat that is released from greenhouse gases, 90% of it is contained by the ocean, with only 10% of it being from various other methods. Now, I point this out to bring us back to the process of deep sea mining itself. When the ocean absorbs this heat and carbon dioxide, it brings it down into the water naturally. The pressure pushes it down into the ground. However, this deep sea mining itself would then, with the collectors, kick up sediment plume or the ground, releasing all of this carbon dioxide back into the water in quantities that would then make it go back into the atmosphere, which would not stop global warming, it would accelerate it at a dramatic level. So in conclusion, no, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone should not be mined because, one, the ISA just simply doesn't have the manpower to properly regulate the area, and by proxy, the CCZ. Secondly, they simply fail as a governing body. They're corrupt and they just shouldn't be the body looking over the area as a whole. And lastly, the whole argument of it being necessary to mine the CCZ because of global warming and everything is just false, and that it would actually do more damage to not just our environment, but the environment of the world as a whole. Thank you.